So I just watched a video. I subscribe to all kinds of things. I'm more interested in content and media rather than social, although social is secondary. Um, so one of the things that kind of interests me a little bit is real estate. I'm not going to be an investor in the near future or even in the far future, or nor am I interested in being a landlord. It's just something, I'm just kind of curious with housing trends and everything. So, a little bit of knowledge goes a long way. So anyway, I just watched a channel that I subscribe to, a really sweet couple. I think they really try to do the right thing, and they maintain their property properly. And so, I was posting in the comments of his video, and then, it's like I remembered. I had just uploaded something this morning about when we had to sell my mother's house, about Sophia Petrillo being snarky about the house selling fast. It was a two-family, so they had tenants, okay? And so I'm going to tell some tenant stories as I remember it. I was a teeny tiny thing when they bought the house, and I vaguely recommend the first set of tenants. All I knew is that the wife's name was May, and they had two children, Mark and Donna. And I don't remember what they looked like, but I remember one of them would always pull my hair. They were bratty. And my parents did not like them. My mother said that she was like a sloppy housekeeper. It was a brand new house, freshly built, okay? And at the time, it was a beautiful neighborhood. Everything was very well maintained, blah, blah, blah. My mother said she was like lazy and a bad housekeeper, and her kids were bratty, and they didn't like them, and they didn't stay that long. I don't know what happened. I was so little, but that's all I remember. And my mother just said that she didn't like them, and my mother told me later, right around the time they were selling the house in 2010, this is a little R-rated, she said, oh, that woman, not only was she sloppy, but their bedroom was on top of our bedroom, and we would hear her moaning at night all the time, moaning and moaning and moaning. No wonder she never kept a good house. She was staying up late at night, doing all kinds of things with her husband. And my mother, it's funny how, all those years later, these stories come out. So that was the first tenant they had that was very brief. And my father said after that, he didn't like, even though he was a father, he just didn't want other kids running on top of his head. That was his phrase. They found an older couple whose adult children were already grown and out of the house. And the husband was a CPA, and he also used one of the bedrooms as an office and would see clients out of there. Even though it was not a commercial district, it was residential. And so, we'll call them Mr. and Mrs. Serena. My father loved them so much, and so did my mother, because there were no kids, there were no nonsense, there was no nothing, and they never raised their rent for at least 20 years, because they were so traumatized by the first tenants. So finally, after a million gazillion years, they had rent that was probably lower than what the going rate for Section 8 would have been at the time. That's how low the rent was. So finally, my parents said, no, everything's going up. We have to raise it a little. So they raised it a little. Then the wife started complaining about the heat. I'm sure my parents more than adequately heated it. They just wanted to, they had to pay a little more finally after 20 years. And so then he retired, and they saved so much money from the cheap rent all those years that they bought a house cash and retired. It's like my parents funded their retirement. But they were great tenants. They came to my wedding, my sister's wedding. They came to our parents' 25th anniversary party. They were sort of almost like family after all those years. And, funny little off on the tangent. When I was married and a little naive, she knew I was pregnant before I did. That's a whole other story. I'll just save that for another story. But anyway, they were like family. They were. These days, it's really hard to find people like that. So after that, my parents were like, well, we could leave it empty because now, all these years have gone by and, da, da, da. But they said, but, we'll see. So then someone hooks them up with like a real estate agent who brings a working couple, and the working couple hid the fact that the wife was pregnant and that the wife's mother was going to be living with them. And my parents were really naive. They held the apartment with a $10 deposit. I mean, this is quite a few years ago, but still, $10. And they were due, let's say, to move in on July 1st. If the apartment's available on July 1st, but you can't move in till July 15th, it's not up to the landlord to absorb 2 weeks of rent. And so the guy, the husband, that, where they were moving in, asked if they could just pay the rent on the 15th of the month instead of the 1st. And my father let him get away with it. My father also had told him, and I don't know if it was in any kind of rental agreement, that there was carpeting in certain rooms of the house, and that he wanted the carpeting to either remain, and if they didn't like the carpeting, they could replace it. Well, the guy ripped the carpeting out, and there was wood underneath, and he decided to have wood. So she has the baby, and the baby was then walking and running all over the place, and my parents were miserable, and there were times that they said they went into their finished basement to sleep because the tenants made that much noise. And my father was the most honest, decent, kind, too good, too kind, and he kept letting things slide, like about the mother living there. It was against the law for him to discriminate because she was having a baby. But they found out, like, she was hiding it. She was 6 months pregnant and deliberately hiding. She was dressed a certain way. They did find that out. But the mother, like, they said, well, it's supposed to be 2 adults. Well, there's 3 bedrooms, and, we need her here to watch the bit. And my father was like, okay. Everything was like, okay. And, I think the last straw was the thing with the carpet. So they were putting up with it. So then finally my father couldn't stand it and offered to pay to put in new carpeting because of the noise. And the guy got into a fight with my father and like cursed him out. And everyone in the neighborhood loved my father. When my father died, people were lined up outside of the funeral home. That's a whole other story too. God, I have so many stories. So, anyway, I think they stiffed them, maybe with like the last month's rent, and caused so many problems that my father just wanted them out of there. And then after that, they were really upset. They were like, oh my God, we tried to do everything to accommodate them, and they just, whatever. So then, I don't know if they were going to not rent, and somebody knew someone and said, look, this is an older woman. She's single. She's not going to have any children. She's past that age. She's a professional. She's an administrator at a hospital. but she used to be an RN, blah, 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 blah. Just meet her. They met this woman, and she was, now my parents were older, and me and my sister were married with family, blah, blah, blah. And she saw the character of my parents, and that, you know, she and they saw her character, so she moved in, and she would check in on my parents. She was like, she knew she had a good deal because she did get like below market rent, but she was constantly checking in on my parents. If she baked something, she might bake a little extra and bring them some. She would always check in. At this point, my father was older. He was 10 years older than my mom. So, like, if he had any medical things going on and my mother needed, like, a little advice from someone that worked in a hospital or was a nurse, she, you know, she more than, they didn't even have to ask her. She wanted to do it. And then finally, after being single her whole life, I think when she hit her 50s, she met someone, got married. He was living there for a while, and they decided that they were going to buy a house out in Long Island, so they left. Now, at this point, my parents were a lot older. They both had challenges with their health, and they were like, you know what? We're just going to leave it empty upstairs. It's not worth it, you know? And so they said, you know, we've done, you know, we've made our money. We've gotten through it. We're too old for any kind of drama or nonsense. And they didn't want to sell and move somewhere else, so they stayed there. And it stayed like that until she sold it in 2010. But the tenant that was there at the end and the Serenas were wonderful. I guess sometimes it doesn't work out, but I think that what happened with my parents was they were afraid of it not renting. They were a little bit naive about the market value and the market and the location. So they were like always offering the rent lower than it should have been because they just didn't want, they thought that like if they gave a lower rent that the person would be a better tenant, but in half the times they were a worse tenant. Because you value, you know, the more you pay for something, I think the more you value it. I don't know, and I would want to weed out the deadbeats, but that's just my spin on it. But they were very blessed. They were happy with their home overall. I recently found a picture of them when they just bought the house, and I never realized, like, I can't remember them ever being that young, but standing in front of the house smiling like, oh, this is the American dream, because where they came from, what they went through. And now I'm going to start crying. A lot of people in this country today take so much for granted because they didn't have to go through certain things. And it's something that all the people they socialized with, the majority of them were immigrants and refugees who worked hard, who were the most decent, salt of the earth people. And I feel like a lot of that shaped me in a positive way. So anyway, everyone, have a great day. And thank you to the landlord, because you kind of like helped me take another trip down memory lane. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.